Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Who Owns Your Tractor? And that is the question today. Who owns your tractor? And what are the stakes? What's being said on both sides? We have a guest here to talk about it. My name is Dan Aberhart. This is Growing the Future. And let's get into it. So, as usual, I can see many of the favorites in the audience here. The chat and the Q&A are both open. We have someone with us who has quite the intellect. I think you're going to want to pick his brain. But before we get into that, I just wanted to say thank you for the sponsors of this show that make it possible. Grip.ag, MNP, Crop Aid Nutrition, Hammond Realty, Bone Trail Originals, and Convergence Conference 2027. So my guest today is Cory Doctorow. He is a science fiction writer. He's a journalist, and he's one of the most cited voices on digital rights anywhere. And we were even talking politics before we went live, which maybe you should never talk about sex, religion, and politics, but generally in sales, I find that what else are you going to talk about if you don't talk about those things? So he is a special advisor to the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He writes at pluralistic.net, and he's a Canadian who's in the UK, sweating it out with no air conditioning at 35 above. But he's got his own lexicon. He's got lots of ideas about the digital frontier. And so let's get into it. Cory, how you doing there this morning?
Sweaty and in a bit in the dark, I'm afraid. This is I've moved back to London pretty recently, and I'm getting my Zoom situation dialed in. So sorry for the fact that I look like a Fraggle in a cave.
That's okay. You had better lighting when you just leaned in a little bit before moved your camera. I think it's catching a lot of the backlight.
And see how it goes. Hang on.
Perfect. Get your selfie light going.
A little better.
I'm very fortunate.
Compensation.
I'm in Vancouver, but I've actually got a sunny day, and I'm out here visiting my sister. So we're right on the water here at Cole Harbour, and it's quite cool. It was a lot hotter in the prairies when I left, so we're going into the heat phase of the summer. But Cory, you have a very interesting take on digital rights and the right to repair, and that's how I picked up on what you were putting down. But I want you to give a little bit of context for the audience about yourself, what your unique ability is, what you share with the world, and what your mission is, because you're a very passionate dude.
Well, so yeah, I'm born and raised in Canada. I left at the end of the last millennium to live first in the US and then in Europe, in the UK, and then in the US again, and now back in the UK, mostly to work for this nonprofit called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a digital rights group. Probably, I think, the most effective and important digital rights group in the world. I've been an activist with them for now going on 25 years. In my other life, I'm a science fiction writer, and between nonfiction about tech and science fiction novels, including books for adults, books for kids, books for young adults, I've written more than 30 of them, many of them bestsellers. I have a #1 Canadian bestseller out this week called The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Life After AI, about being a good AI critic and understanding what part is hype, what part isn't, and what danger the hype poses, and how to get through it, how to burst the bubble but keep the good parts. I'm not sure what else to say. I have a lot of institutional affiliations. I teach at a bunch of different universities, and I am, as that old CBC contest went, as Canadian as possible under the circumstances.
I love it. I love it. So Harry Siemens has a question. Harry is a journalist by trade. He's saying, question, tell me, what are digital rights and how do they affect me? That's probably a really good place to start, Cory.
Yeah. So it's funny. I actually had this conversation with a friend yesterday. So we're realizing it's hard to nail this one down. And we've been working on it for 35 years. So you'd think that we'd have a good answer. And I think the reason that it's hard to pin down is that 35 years ago, the thing we used to say is, look, you've got a bunch of rights in the real world, right? People aren't allowed to read your letters without a warrant. They're not allowed to discriminate against you or spy on you or censor what you're allowed to say. But with this new digital world, And we just want to make sure that all of these rights that you have in the physical world follow you into the digital world. And at the time, it's quite funny because I think to the extent that people criticize this idea, they criticize it as unserious. They were like, what do you mean you need to be sure you're not going to get censored in the digital world? You mean in those places where you like argue about Star Trek with sad nerds, right? Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Right? But we won a bunch of really important cases. You know, we started out as an impact litigation shop with some activists, and now we're kind of a half and half impact litigation where we take on lawsuits or sue governments mostly to overturn bad laws or enforce certain interpretations of laws, and then also to try and get people involved as these laws and policies are getting made. So, for example, we won a case where the cops had seized an email server, and they said, we don't need a warrant for this to read the email, right? We have the warrant for the servers, so why do we need a warrant to read the email? And we said, well, you know, if you seize a filing cabinet, it doesn't mean you have the right to read the private correspondence inside it. That's a separate warrant, right? You have a right to be secure in your papers. Later on, we won a really important case. This one was called Bernstein, where the National Security Agency, it was kind of like CSIS, they had this idea that civilians shouldn't be allowed to access working cryptography, right? They said that if you have access to technology that can scramble your messages so thoroughly that we can't read them, then all the bad guys, terrorists and child pornographers and drug dealers, what we call the four horsemen of the apocalypse, these people are going to be able to get away with literal and figurative murder. And so you shouldn't be allowed to have any way to keep a secret online. And they had this idea that what they could do is give you access to weaker forms of cryptography, or intentionally broken forms of cryptography. And if they did that, that they would be able to break it. But all the people you'd worry about breaking it, like stalkers and identity thieves, industrial spies, spies who work for other countries, creeps, that they wouldn't be able to break into it. And so they had this weak cipher called DES 50, the Defense Encryption Standard at 50 bits. And they said, this is enough for you and enough for everyone in America. It's enough to keep your secrets. And we said it didn't work. And they said, no, it's fine. It's fine. So we built a computer called Deep Crack for $250,000 that could brute force the whole cyberspace in 2.5 hours. And we said, this is it. If you're the mafia, if you're another country, a hostile country, if you're a creep, all you need is $250,000. And you can push fake firmware updates to every device. You can break into every computer. You can read all the private messages. And no one cared. They just said, well, this all sounds very technical. The NSA has hired a significant majority of the world's best mathematicians for the last 50 years. They say you're wrong. I'm a judge. What do I know about encryption? And so instead, we represented this cryptographer named Daniel J. Bernstein, who was a grad student at the University of California at Berkeley. And back before we had the web, we had this thing called Usenet, which was a way to do message boards, but on the web, not just on a little bulletin board system that you and people who are in the same area code as you spoke to. And on Usenet, Bernstein was publishing the computer code, the source code, for a program called Snuffle that was stronger than DES 50 and was therefore classed as ammunition by the NSA and illegal for civilians to access. So these were words that were illegal for civilians to own. And we went to court and we said the First Amendment, which is part of the American Constitution that protects your right to free speech, the First Amendment protects the right to publish source code. That source code is a form of protected speech. And we won in the lower court. We won in the appellate division in the Ninth Circuit. The NSA didn't want to take their chances with the Supreme Court. And now, when you get a firmware update for your pacemaker, or you talk to your bank, or you want to access a website without other people snooping on it, or you want to connect to a Wi-Fi access point without other people nearby being able to see your communications, you use modern encryption that's only legal because of this case. And so that was the origins of digital rights. It was making sure that our real world rights followed us into the digital world. But as you may have noticed, a lot of those real world rights are going away in the real world And oftentimes it's because of things happening in the digital world. And so in the decades since, the mission has kind of flipped. It's like now it's like, how do we restore our real world rights to privacy by aggressively enforcing those rights and asserting those rights in the digital world so that we can have the rights at all. And that has become the real mission these days.
I love it. That's very interesting. So, how would you say we are doing in the agricultural world in digital rights on a scale of 1 to 10? And how did agriculture come up on your radar?
Well, I think, the issues that I overlap with in ag are IP issues, and IP issues used to be very narrow, right? They used to be like, I'm a writer, right? They used to be like, who can turn your story into a movie or photocopy your book? And these days, because IP issues are anything to do with a computer, everything is an IP issue, which is bonkers. And so we don't work on pharma patents or GMO patents per se, but because of where we sit in the world of digital rights and policy, like I used to be a delegate at the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva, which is the UN agency that does IP treaties. I spent a lot of time talking to people who are involved in like GMO patents. So there's sort of the Roundup style patent issues that I have some overlap with, but the square and central stuff that I overlap with is repair, modification, and extension of ag tech, right? And that is, notoriously John Deere, but not just John Deere, where you have digital locks that are used to do what's called parts pairing, which prevents the use of third-party spares, but also improved third-party components like head ends from being connected to a device because the MCU, the main computing unit, does a little handshake to say, hey, are you the official part, and were you installed by an official technician? And if the answer to either of those questions is no, it won't use it. There are other issues that overlap. So for quite some time, precision ag info that was being generated by tilling your field was locked inside your tractor, and you had to buy it as a bundle with seed from certain seed companies. So you generate the data, right? The torque sensors on your wheels, the humidity sensors on the undercarriage of your machine. Those are doing centimeter accurate soil density surveys that are quite useful for precision ag. And Deere was siphoning that data out of your tractor. They had a whole unit that was trying to figure out how to sell that to the futures market to do bets on agricultural yields, like regional agricultural yields. But that also meant that like you were being tied into using certain seed in order to get your own data that you generated with a tractor you owned, driving it through fields that you owned with your own hands, that data can only be accessed on their terms. Now they've loosened that up somewhat. It's still like on their terms, right? They've said, oh, well, we're such good-natured slobs, we'll let you have access to that data. And I kind of feel like, well, don't do me any favors, right? Whose data was it? And then there's a digital sovereignty side of all of this. So you may remember some of Putin's thugs stole $6 million worth of Deere tractors from Ukraine. And because those tractors, are connected to Deere's cloud on wireless links, when they showed up in Chechnya, Deere could see it. And then these dealerships in Ukraine worked with Deere to send kill signals to those tractors, and they immobilized them. And, look, I'm a cyberpunk writer. I hear that and I think, that's super cool, right? But then I think about it for like 10 seconds and I'm like, wait, Trump keeps telling us we're about to be the 51st state, and Trump's tech companies do whatever he tells them to do. Deere is a tech company these days. And what happens if he tells them to shut down all the tractors in Canada until we give them Alberta? And so I really feel like there's this sovereignty side of things that it overlaps with my work as well. And what I would say in terms of like where ag sits in terms of these policy fights is, while there are certain sui generis aspects to ag, right? So like one is that electorally ag looks different from other sectors that are affected by this, because ag definitionally happens in low density regions. and the way that our electoral maps work, that means that representatives tend to be more responsive to people who live in those low density regions. They just have fewer, I'm sorry, there's a helicopter going by. They just have fewer voters, right, that they're responsive to. You know, if you're a senator representing a state that begins and ends with a vowel, right, you just have fewer voters that you're responsive to than if you are a senator from California, say. And so electorally, ag is different. Obviously, in terms of like the role ag plays in civilizational continuance, it's different, right? If we lose ag, we starve to death. So that's a very different thing. But there are some ways in which ag is absolutely connected to all these other issues. And this is actually where I think ag has some real strengths, because the same law that stops you from fixing a tractor or stopping your tractor from being immobilized is the law that stops every Canadian from running an alternative Facebook client that puts the news back in. And it's the same law that stops you from using third-party ink in your printer instead of buying it at $10,000 a gallon. And it's the same law that stops school boards from putting their own textbooks into Google Classroom instead of the ones that are tied into Google Classroom. And it's the same one that stops every ministry federally and provincially in Canada from using an app to extract all their data from Office 365 and put it in a locally hosted open source app that Donald Trump can't shut down. And so that means that there's a coalition among people who care about ag tech and fairness for farmers, and people who care about all these other issues that on their face don't seem connected. And that, you know, in my years working in politics and policy, it's coalitions that get things done. And so I think that's like the most hopeful thing I have to say. And the same goes for ag and market concentration, right? If you're a rancher dealing with 4 meat packers, right? Or if you're a poultry farmer dealing with 3 poultry packers, or if you're an egg farmer whose eggs are being, you know, having to deal with these most favored nation deals that huge conglomerates like what do they call Cal Farms do with the grocers, where you can't get more than Cal Farms is getting for their eggs. If you grow eggs, even though Cal Farms is able to extract all kinds of preferential discounts elsewhere, and can therefore put you out of business, all of those issues are also issues that have parallels, right? You know, these are the same dirty commercial arrangements that every writer faces in respect of the 5 publishers, that every publisher faces in respect of the one giant bookseller. And so there are so many potential coalitions on these competition issues that it actually makes me feel quite hopeful about the potential for people who care about these issues because they feed us, with the people who care about these issues because they keep us from getting sick or make us better when we're hurt, with the people who make us laugh or keep us entertained or keep us informed, with the people who build our homes, right? These are all people who are facing the same structural issues. And the fix for all of their issues, there's some differences. A lot of the fixes are the same. And so there's so many areas where we can have each other's back and make a big difference.
Wow, that's amazing. There's a lot of ground you covered there, my friend. That's really cool. I appreciate that. Harry Siemens has a comment here. He said, my brother, who has farmed for 70 years, which is no small thing in itself. 70 years, that's impressive, Harry. How old is he? Went to pick up 2 air filters for his John Deere tractor. So he picked the salesman's brain on how to install them. Why? Because if he had asked them to come and install, it would be another $500 maybe. Had it been a repair, maybe no option. So this is to the heart of the nuts and bolts of this. What do you see happening right at the parts counter, at the service gate, at the field?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, you told me you were an ex-Deere dealer, so you will have insight into this that I don't have. But I know that, you know, that noted socialist Adam Smith, right, the father of capitalism, the guy who wrote Animal Sentiments and you know, the founding documents of capitalist theory. He said it's not from the generosity of the baker that we get our bread. It's from his self-regard, right? The reason that the baker gives us good bread at a fair price is because he's worth it someone else. will sell us better bread at a fairer price if the baker cheats us. Now, there are plenty of people out there who are honorable and would do the honorable thing even if they weren't worried about losing their business. When we're talking about a firm, right? Firm made up of multiple factions of people, some of whom are more greedy than others, right? Who are all vying to control the conduct of the firm. The worse it goes for the company if they cheat you, the easier it is for the good people to win the argument when they're deciding what they're going to do. And we were talking about this before we went on air. I've spent a lot of time in the last 5 years working on the antitrust cases against the American big tech firms. Google lost 3 antitrust cases. They're a thrice convicted monopolist. And one of those cases, the search case, the DOJ, when they published all the memos that Google had been forced to disgorge as part of the investigation, they showed that there had been this turning point at Google in 2019, because Google's search revenue growth had capped out because they had 90% of the market. You got 90% of the market, you can't grow, right? Who are you going to sign up to search? You can breed 1 billion humans to maturity and make them customers. That's a product called Google Classroom, but it takes 15 years to bear fruit. In the meantime, the market wants growth tomorrow, right? And so they had this great idea. They were like, what if we make search worse? What if you have to search twice or 3 times to get your answer? This guy who worked there, Prabhakar Raghavan, who's in charge of Google search revenue, see the memos that he's writing where he's got this idea. We're going to show you ads 3 times. So when we used to only show you ads once because we give you the answer in the first query. And his rival, a guy called Ben Gomes, who's a technician, he'd started building Google's hardware infrastructure when it was like a couple of computers under a desk, and he would live to build out all the global data centers. He's like, that's a terrible idea, and I'd feel like a bad person if we did it. But that's all he could say, because Google had bought all the shelf space. Every search box you could ever find on the internet was wired to Google's servers, no matter what vendor, no matter what browser, no matter what carrier, no matter what hardware, no matter what operating system was a Google search box, right? So it wasn't like you're going to find another search engine. They also were paying Apple $20 billion a year not to enter the search market. They totally captured their regulators. So what was going to happen? Like, why wouldn't they capitalize on that? And you can imagine that Prabhakar Raghavan, the guy who got this idea to make Google search worse, what I call enshittifying Google search, that he wasn't the first person to go, wait, if you have to search twice, we get to show you ads twice. You don't have to be like the Louis Pasteur of business strategy to think that one up, right? But he was the first guy to win the argument. And the reason he won the argument is because our policymakers, not Google's executives who work for their shareholders, but our policymakers who work for us, took decisions that they were warned would create this circumstance. They let Google buy its competitors. They let Google bribe Apple $20 billion a year not to enter the search market. They created what I call the enshittigenic environment, the environment that generates shit, right? And they worked for us. And they meant that this guy won the argument. And so I'm sure there's plenty of people who work at John Deere, who are lovely people, who revel in the idea of producing machines that make better ways for farmers to feed the world. But when there's an argument about enshittifying a John Deere tractor, what you want is a policy environment that supports those people, so that when they say, well, I get where you're coming from, I can see how that would make us more money, but have you thought about how much money we're going to lose when they go to our competition? Have you thought about how much money they're going to lose when they go to our regulators? Have you thought about how much money we're going to lose when our key employees quit? So Canada has the most workers in the world who are under non-competes, where if they quit their jobs, they can't work for a rival firm.
Oh, really? Did not know that.
So, if you want companies to behave, you've got to equip the people in the companies who are good people with the tools to win arguments about the company's conduct. And we decided not to enforce competition law and to let firms buy their rivals. We created new IP laws that let firms block repair. We allow them to engage in anti-competitive conduct where, you can't get third parties to supply you with parts. We extended IP protection to aspects of their business where they can use patents and other IP to block interoperable parts and head ends and consumables and so on. And so all of that creates the environment where the guy who's like, rather than making a better tractor, why don't we just make a tractor that extracts more money from farmers? That guy wins the argument. And that's why I think the brother had to haul his bones, which are, like, assuming he started farming at 12, at least 82 years old, to the dealership
Yeah.
to get the filters and pick the guy's brain about how to install them without losing a finger. Because there aren't 10 rival dealerships vying for the business who will come out and install them for less using a third-party filter that might work as good or might even work better.
They live a long time. They have a high standard of living in Winkler, Manitoba. Don't you know, Cory?
I hear that about Manitoba. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Wob Canoe says we got more doctors than anybody now, so we're good. Hey,
89 this November. He started at 19, and he's skiing this week. You know, when I took my parents to the Grand Canyon once, and they told us if you can hike it when you're over, I think 70, if you can hike all the way to the bottom, they refund your park entry fee.
oh yeah, exactly. I've heard that too. Yeah. So Cory, I guess I wanted you to illustrate for us a little bit about the history of how this developed. I'm also wondering, is this just a natural outcropping of the situation where some of this is so obtuse and we don't even know it's happening? It's hard for companies that are trying to increase their profits or market share not to put their hand in the cookie jar, because it's like, we probably won't get caught. Nobody, because does anybody care? Does anybody care?
Yeah, well, let me tell you about Canadians caring about this stuff. We have to start in 1998 in America when, actually, you know what? Can I start in 1996 in America?
You can go wherever you want. Yeah.
All right. So in 1996, Bill Clinton wanted to demilitarize the internet because it was run by the Pentagon. And he put Al Gore in charge of it. This was the information superhighway. Do you remember that? We were gonna make a commercial internet, a civilian internet. And Al Gore had these hearings where he was like, come give me ideas for what this commercial internet could happen. Bill Clinton had this guy who was called Bill Clinton's IP czar, right? He was like the director of IP issues for America, a guy called Bruce Lehman, still alive, living in Florida. And he went to Al Gore and he said, I've got this great idea. What if we make it illegal to reverse engineer and modify a computer? We'll call it copyright law. But what it means is that if a computer is designed not to do something when you buy it, then it's illegal to make it do that thing, even if the thing is legal. So if your computer is designed not to let you play video games unless they came from the manufacturer, right? Like your Sega Dreamcast has these CDs that come from Sega's factory, and they're pressed there, and they press something into the disc that lets you know it comes from factory. Then we're going to make it illegal to alter your Sega so it can just play someone else's discs. And Al Gore said, that sounds like a terrible idea. Get lost. Who's everlasting credit? So Bruce Lehman went to Geneva. He went to the World Intellectual Property Organization, where I used to be a delegate, this UN specialized agency that has the same relationship to bad copyright law that Mordor has to evil, every bad copyright idea in the history of the world. And he got them to pass a treaty that enshrined this as an obligation, right? You have to pass what's called an anti-circumvention law that makes it illegal to modify your printer to take third-party ink, right? Or your computer to take apps that don't come from the App Store. And then he went back to Congress, and he's described this repeatedly as, quote, doing an end run around Congress. He went back to Congress, and he got them to pass a law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA 12, and Section 1201 of the DMCA makes it a felony to modify your own computer to do things that are legal if the manufacturer disapproves of it. My friend Jay Freeman calls that felony contempt of business, right? It carries a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine. And then the U.S. trade representative, who goes to other countries and tries to get them to change their laws in order to trade with America, went around the world like evil Johnny Appleseed and got every country in the world to enact a version of this law that made it illegal to repair the defects in America's defective tech exports. So in America, this law victimized Americans and made them pay too much for their software and their printer ink, and made it impossible to add privacy controls to their tools and whatever, but at least it benefited the American stock market. because all those countries were headquartered in California, pretended that they were based in Delaware, right? If you're France, this doesn't benefit you. Why would you pass this law? Well, the reason they passed the law is that the U.S. trade rep said, if you don't pass this law, we're going to slap tariffs on your exports. So everyone passed this law. See where this is going, I take it.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's where the Canadian part comes in. In 2010, Stephen Harper ordered two of his ministers, Tony Clement and James Moore from Coquitlam, to get this law on Canada's books. This was the fourth attempt Canada had made to get it on the books. So it first happened under the Liberals. A junior minister called Sam Balte tried twice. She was so unsuccessful, she lost her seat over it in Parkdale in Toronto, and it flipped to the NDP for a generation because people thought it was such a terrible idea. Jim Prentice tried to do it. He failed completely. So if you're Tony Clement and James Moore and you're trying to figure out what to do about this, because everyone hates this idea and it's failed 3 times, you need a strategy. So they're like, I know what we're going to do. We're going to do a consultation. We're going to ask Canadians what they think of this, and then they'll feel heard. And then when we do it anyway, they'll go, well, at least we were heard, right? This failed. 6,132 of us wrote into the consultation to say, don't do this, it's terrible. And 53 of us wrote in to say we liked it. So what did James Moore do? He went to Toronto. He gave the keynote speech to the International Chamber of Commerce. He said, everyone who disagrees with me is a, quote, babyish radical extremist. He threw out 6,132 consultation responses. He took the 53 people who agreed with them. They whipped the caucus in 2012, and the Copyright Modernization Act, Bill C-11, passed in 2012. And it has been the law of the land ever since. And so this is why when Facebook takes the news out of your app, a Canadian company can't just make an app that logs into your Facebook as you, grabs everything Facebook's waiting to show you, blocks all the ads, puts the news back in, and shows you that along with, you know, your LinkedIn and your Twitter and maybe, you know, your kayak messages or some other Canadian social media network. After all, this is what Facebook did when they were starting. You know, when Facebook started, everyone had a MySpace account. And so they gave you a bot and you told it who you were on MySpace and you give your MySpace password and it went to MySpace several times a day and grabbed everything waiting for you there, scraped it, put it in your Facebook wall, and you could reply to it and push it back out again. You could eat your cake and have it too. You could leave MySpace but still see what was happening on MySpace, right? Like you can leave your.
Sorry, I had to laugh. MySpace. That's a beautiful callback. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, like you didn't have to care which network someone was on, which, you know, it is the most weird CompuServe AOL prodigy ass 1990s bullshit that you've got to know which social media someone uses to send them a message. I was like caring about which SIM is in their phone to send them a message, right? It's bonkers. So we could go into business fixing that stuff. We could sell those jailbreaks to everyone in the world. We could turn America's trillions into our billions, but we passed this stupid law in 2012 after 6,132 of us said it was a bad idea and 53 of us said it was a good idea. We've kept the law in the books ever since because we didn't want tariffs on our exports, and here we are, happy Liberation Day, right? We got tariffs on our goods already, right? So like if there's never been a better time to repeal this law that everyone hates and that we passed in return for something we didn't get. You know, when someone threatens to burn your house down unless you do as you're told, and you do it and they burn your house down anyway, you're a sucker if you keep doing it, right? If elbows up means anything, it's not like drinking Wayne Gretzky's shitty rye instead of delicious American bourbon. It's jailbreaking our tractors and selling the jailbreaks to the corn farmer in America so that when Trump tries to retaliate against us, he says, don't do that. They buy my corn and they fix my tractor.
I want to know what the farmers here think. Do they care? Is it a big deal? And I think the manufacturer's argument is, hey, we don't want people stealing our IP. We don't want people turning tractors up past the horsepower that everything is designed for. We don't want people to take off the environmental regulations because everybody knows STEF was a wonderful invention that came out of California. But
Right.
what you had an example in the green room there that obviously directly impacted farmers' ability to choose how they configure their equipment based on the lockdown. And it's really, you know, open source and jailbreak and how you have different attachments versus not. Can you
Yeah,
tell
you
us
know,
about that?
Honeybee is a Canadian success story. They make their parts in Saskatchewan, they have a factory there, and they make head ends, right? They make the stuff that decides whether your tractor is a tiller or a thresher, you know, today, right? It's the component that connects to the motor and the rotary aspects of it, right? And that's been normal since tractors began, that there were mix and match components for tractors. And what John Deere uses is something called parts pairing, where you've got what's called a system on a chip, which is just like it's a microchip that has a full system on it. It's exactly what it sounds like. And they're cheap. Like they start at about a quarter and they go up to a couple of bucks. And they can run a whole computer program. And so you put a system on a chip on the part, you've got the main computing unit in the tractor, you connect the part to the tractor. The tractor says, prove to me that you're a John Deere part and that you were installed by a John Deere technician. The way that happens is the John Deere technician has initialized the part, or the part has been given a back end that connects to that has a code that tells it that it's an OEM part and not a third-party spare. And because of Section 1201 of the DMCA and our own version, the Copyright Modernization Act, it's illegal to write code that bypasses that. And so if you own a John Deere tractor, but you want to buy a Honeybee head end, you can't install it. So do farmers care about this? Well, John Deere has gone to some pretty extraordinary lengths to prevent right to repair legislation from passing and to maintain this regime where they get to decide who spares, repairs, parts, head ends, interoperable components, and apps you can run. And if it were the case that like farmers just wanted to use John Deere stuff, they wouldn't have to do that, right? Apple makes this argument all the time. They're like, why do we need repair laws? No one wants to get their phone fixed by a guy in a mall. Well, if that were the case, what is the repair law there for, right? Who is going to get their iPhone fixed from the guy in the mall if not an iPhone owner? At which point they're like, well, you're not a good iPhone owner if you want to get your iPhone fixed from the guy in the mall. You're a bad iPhone owner, right? Well, what vendor could not make the argument that you could come a cropper if you bought your components, your consumables, your spares from a third party? You know, Nike could say, hey, if you put someone else's shoelaces in your Jordans, they could snap and you could roll your ankle and it could be a career-ending injury. And that's why you got to buy your shoelaces from us. GM could say, you buy the wrong gasoline, there goes your engine. And then you're going to expect us to fix it. And you're going to give us bad reviews, right? Why should we let you put anyone's gasoline in your car? Right now, it is true that you could attach something to your tractor that could make it run badly, right? Either for you or the environment or both. And it is true that John Deere can sometimes give you advice that's good advice. But in the absence of some consequence for giving you bad advice, the irreconcilable conflict of interest that John Deere has, which is that they make more money when you just buy their stuff, even if their stuff is worse, that irreconcilable conflict of interest cannot be reconciled. It is only if you have the choice that John Deere is motivated to only give you good advice, and where the good people at John Deere win the argument every time. And so, you know, there are ways that we resolve problems with people making unsafe modifications to their equipment, which is with education and regulation and fines and regulation of other market participants who sell defective goods, right? Like that's where we get it, right? The problem with appointing John Deere to step in where we would want a democratically accountable government agency to do the work is that John Deere will tell you point blank every time, we are legally only accountable to our shareholders and we must do everything that we can to improve our shareholders' bottom line, even if it comes at your expense. And what they'll add is, but normally it's not at your expense. But there's clearly times when it is. And so if we want it to never come at our expense, we have to give them consequences for treating us wrong.
In the ecosystem of capitalism, is anybody offering an alternative that they could vote for with their dollars? Do we see that being?
Yeah, this is the problem with voting with your dollars, is that once you have monopolies, vote with your dollar doesn't do much good. You know, you people make my food, so you know all about Procter and Gamble and Unilever, right? The two consumer packaged good companies that control nearly everything in your grocery aisle that isn't produce or meat. And when you walk down the shelf, you will see 50 brands. And when you pick them up and look underneath them, they're all going to come from Procter and Gamble or Unilever. And if you go out there and you choose the low packaging alternative because you care about the environment, Procter and Gamble will make the low packaging alternative and the high packaging alternative and put them next to each other on your shelf. And if someone enters the market with some goods that are better than Procter and Gamble's and they can't force them out of the market with exclusionary deals, sorry, I don't know what that very loud noise coming from outside is. Can you hear that?
No, we're good.
Anyway.
Yeah, we're okay. Thanks. Yeah.
If they can't lock them out with exclusionary deals, they will buy that company. And when they buy the company, they're going to issue a press release. And they're going to say, we just bought mom and pop chocolate chip cookies because we know our customers value choice, right? And the choice is buy whatever you want so long as it comes from Procter and Gamble. So voting with your wallet is a rigged election, right? Voting with your wallet to escape a monopoly, it's like, recycling really hard to escape a wildfire, right? The way you've changed politics is to vote with your ballot. And we do have politicians on both sides of the political spectrum who are saying enough is enough when it comes to deference to corporate power. And the sovereignty issue has made it especially pointed because there is such an enormous sovereignty overlap. I was just on this panel in Toronto where it was about digital sovereignty, and all my co-panelists were like, yeah, digital sovereignty is really important. We need to build some Canadian AI. I was like, are you people like crazy? What do you think happens to Canada if they shut off the chatbots tomorrow? Is there a company that goes under? Is there a ministry that shuts down? Right? Is there a household that suffers? Yeah, your kid has to do their own homework. Who cares? But you know what happened this year? Trump shut down the International Criminal Court's Microsoft Office 365 accounts. And because they swore out an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu, he's Benjamin Netanyahu's friend. And when he did that, the court shut down too. They lost all their working files. They lost all of their email archives. They lost all of their documents. They lost their email addresses, which meant they couldn't log into anything else. Trump then did it again in Brazil to a high court judge who sentenced his buddy Jair Bolsonaro to prison for staging a coup. Trump, if he wants to take Alberta, does not need to roll tanks into Edmonton. All he needs to do is shut off Office 365, and the province shuts down too. And if that doesn't work, he can brick all the tractors. So we have a real digital sovereignty issue, but it's not AI. It's this stuff.
Is right to repair as big an issue as who owns the data? Because you referenced the power in some of this data. It's almost unimaginable, because if market conditions across North America or the world, or, the information coming from these tractors and these combines is visceral, right? Like you could play the market, or, you could,
Yep.
What's the big issue? And I think farmers have asked for a long time, like, who owns my data? I want to keep my data, but it seems like it's sort of gone by. I don't hear a lot about it anymore. It's sort of like, well, I think everybody knows they're the product.
Well, let me tell you, they're in some ways the same issue, right? Because while there might be like different legal regimes, right, about repair, like we might have a different repair law to a data access law, and we might get a privacy commissioner to talk about your data instead of ombudsman to talk about repair. There is a sense in which like neither of these issues would even be issues if we didn't have Bill C-11 on the books.
Yeah.
Because if it was legal for you to modify the software of your tractor, whether or not John Deere thought it had access to your data would be irrelevant. You would just turn off that access, right? Like, it is much easier for you to have the argument about whether John Deere is allowed to use your data if you can stop John Deere from getting your data in the first place.
Yeah.
And that same law is the thing that stops you from changing the software in your tractor so that you can use a third-party spare, third-party diagnostic tools, third-party repair technicians. And so I kind of think that, like, you can tell that these arguments are being led by lawyers instead of people who use this equipment, because their arguments are all about what the law should say and not what the technology should do. Right? If the technology just does what you tell it to do, then the question of whether or not John Deere is allowed to use your data becomes irrelevant, because John Deere doesn't get your data. Right? The only reason we're asking a question about what limits there should be on what John Deere can do with your data is that John Deere can suck the data out of your tractor and you can't stop them. Well, if you can stop them, who cares what the law lets them do? You just stop them from accessing it. And then they have to show up and ask you for the data.
To your point, though, who at that level, other than lawyers, is making this argument about data?
Well, this is back to this coalition, because, there is lots of people who would like their devices to do what they tell them to do, because they want to fix them, because they don't want to be spied on, because they don't want to be victimized by identity thieves or corporate espionage or foreign governments or abusive partners, right? There's so many different ways in which the fact that our technology doesn't do what we tell it to do harms us. Think about privacy for a minute here. The reason we are spied on in Canada is because Americans do it. And the reason Americans can spy on us is because they haven't had a new privacy law since 1988. The last federal consumer privacy law in the US is a law that bans video store clerks from disclosing your VHS rentals. The reason American tech companies gather your data about everything except your video rentals is the same reason your dog licks its nuts, because they can, and no one's stopping them, right? And it's not like passing a new privacy law is hard. Like, we know how to do it. It's not like figuring out how to embalm a pharaoh or something, right? This is like, we were passing privacy laws when Die Hard was in theaters, right? It's just like, it's not that hard to do. They just won't do it because they've been captured by large firms that have a concentrated sector. And the reason that the public pushback on this has failed is that everyone who's argued for a law that has an intersection with privacy didn't know that what they needed was privacy. They thought they were worried about something else. They're like, my grandpa is a QAnon and I think Mark Zuckerberg brainwashed him. Or my kid is anorexic and I think Mark Zuckerberg brainwashed her. Or I think I'm being racially discriminated against in online lending or housing or job searches. Or I'm worried that everyone who came to the trucker convoy or an anti-ICE demonstration was ratted out because their Google location data was sucked up by cops. Or I'm worried that someone's making deep fake porn of me or my daughter, right? All those people, what they're actually worried about is privacy, right? They think they're worried about conspiratorialism or election disinformation or child targeting on social media. Let me tell you, you can't target a child until you know they're a child. And you can't know they're a child unless you're allowed to spy on them. And so we have this potential coalition now for privacy that's very large. The thing that we need to do isn't to get people to care about privacy. It's to get people to understand that the privacy issue they have is a privacy issue and not an election disinformation issue or a right to protest issue or whatever. In the same way that the repair issue is not and the data issue aren't separate issues. They're both issues about what you might call technological self-determination, right? The right to decide how your stuff works, or even more simply, property rights. The right to decide how your property that belongs to you and you bought it and you own it, how you use it, which shoelaces go in your Nikes, which gas goes in your gas tank, and which software runs on your iPhone are all the same issue. And that issue boils down to, I bought it, it's mine, go to hell.
Why do you care about this so much?
Well, I care about this because I see all the ways technology could improve our lives. And I see all the ways that technology could make our lives very, very, very bad. I am a dystopian science fiction writer, after all.
Fair.
And I know that the reason that technology is so bad today is not because of the great forces of history. It's not because of the iron laws of capitalism or economics. It's because policymakers took decisions in living memory that had the foreseeable and foreseen outcome of producing this world that we are now trapped in. And the reason I know it was foreseen is because we foresaw it and we told them by the thousands. And they called us babyish radical extremists and threw away our comments.
Harry Siemens is sharing some comments here. He said, absolutely, farmers are concerned, but color, model, and year are more important. I recently heard from several farmers, and the cost for that technician to come out and look and maybe repair was high, to say the least. And it is a moat if you can't, some of this stuff you can't. I mean, it's become an issue. I mean, if you have a 1985 GM square body, you can fix it. If I have a 2025, whatever, 3-liter diesel, when some of that stuff starts going, I don't know when it's that age relative to a 1985, if it won't just be scrap, but maybe it won't matter by then. But Harry's saying, and the tractor doesn't break down in the shed in the winter, but in the field when they need it most. I like what you said here, because in a way the problems are really complex, and there'd just be so much more conversation we could have about this. But at the end of the day, it sounds like the solutions are actually fairly simple, and there's something that can be done. It's not all is lost. So what should we do?
Well, I think this is the most hopeful moment for making a big policy swing in the last 25 years, because this is the moment when the problems of taking away technological self-determination are visible to all of us. And it's frankly thanks to Trump, right? Trump inherited a poker game rigged in his favor, and he found it so annoying to have to pretend to play that he flipped the table over anyway, right? And so whereas his predecessors, when they like weaponized American tech platforms and American IP law to make advantages for American firms at the expense of their trading partners, he did it in like subtle and deniable ways. And Trump is just like smashing his fists down on the table, making it really clear, when he says 51st state, you know what he means, right? There's no ambiguity there. And so we got this like elbows up moment. Our answer to elbows up was pretty dumb, right? It was making everything we buy from America more expensive. That's a very weird way to punish America. It's like punching yourself in the face as hard as you can and hoping the downstairs neighbor says, ouch, right? We have an alternative. We could just turn America's trillions into our billions, right? We just jailbreak their stuff and sell it to them, because Americans hate this stuff too. If they can figure out how to buy our reasonably priced pharmaceuticals using the US Postal Service, they can figure out how to buy software from us. And look, I know that, engines are more complicated now than they were before, but engines have always been complicated relative to the other technologies around at the time, right? It wasn't like popping the hood on your tractor or your car if you didn't know anything about it and just sticking your fingers in and seeing if you could fix it was a thing that was a good idea or would leave you with all of your fingers, right? The reason farmers could fix their tractors is they learned how. And the reason they were able to learn how is because it was legal to teach them how and make the tools they needed to fix those tractors. I live here in the UK, as you know, and I just moved back. But before I left the last time around, I went to this amazing open air museum, what we would call in Canada Pioneer Village, but they don't have pioneers in England, so they call it an open air museum. It's this place called Beamish outside of Newcastle. And they've got like an Edwardian colliery, like a coal mine that they rescued and moved there. And they've got a Victorian high street. They've got all these vehicles from all over the place. And they have a farmhouse. And that farmhouse sits on a Roman foundation. It's original to the land from the time in which Brittany was part of the Roman Empire. And that foundation includes a forge, right? Because farmers have been fixing their shit for as long as the plow has existed. Because as you know, when you need to bring the crops in, you can't wait for a technician. When the storm is coming, when the food is ripe. You hear congressional testimony from people whose gear is broken and who can hear the ripe produce falling off the plants and hitting the ground as it ripens because they can't harvest it because they're waiting for a Deere technician to come out and fix their tractor. Farmers have means, motive, and opportunity to use tools that will teach them how to fix their tractors, even sophisticated tractors, even tractors with computers in it. I've worked in computers all my life. You don't have to be smart to work in computers. I know some very, very stupid people who work in computers. I promise you, if you can figure out how to fix the computers in your tractor, if you can figure out how to fix the other components in your tractor, it's mostly just reinstalling the software. 9 times out of 10, it's just boring. It's not hard. And look, when a storm is coming, I'd rather you do it than lose your crop waiting for a Deere technician to come out and pick your pocket and do it. And so I think we're at a moment where you have an industrial interest in doing this, right? We can build a new Canadian IT sector that does this, not one that's just chasing like losses with AI, but actually doing something real that the world wants, that Americans want, that Canadians want, where we have a digital sovereignty question that is the most live and urgent question we've had since the War of 1812, and where we have a consumer rights issue that's only gotten worse for 50 years or 25 years. And that is about as bad as it can get. Man, these services suck. And we all want to leave them. And we're just trapped in them because no one can make that tool that lets you leave MySpace and go to Facebook without losing contact with your friends. Because when Mark Zuckerberg did it to Rupert Murdoch on MySpace, that was progress. But somehow if we do it to him, that's piracy. You know, it's fine to move fast and break things when they're his, as far as I'm concerned. Move fast and break all of those guys' things. Just don't move fast and break our things. You know, it's not moving fast and breaking things that's bad. It's moving fast and breaking everyday people's things if you're an oligarch who wants to get rich. So this is our moment. We've never had a better one. And the way you're going to solve it is by getting involved in politics. Farmers are organized. They're a political force. We know that, right? Where we got antitrust law was the Grangers. You know, the Grangers were farmers who were being screwed by the railroad companies who knew that there was only one way you could get your produce to market on their trains. And so they knew that they could charge you just enough to get another crop in the ground and not 1 penny more, and that you would pay it. And so the farmers, having a lot of pitchforks around the place, made it very clear that they were displeased with the railroad executives. And in 1890, John Sherman, the senator whose brother was Tecumseh Sherman, who burned down Atlanta, said, if we would not tolerate a king in our country, we should not tolerate an autocrat of trade, passed the Sherman Act, and they broke up the railroads. You people have political power, right? The Prairie Fire changed Canada and America. You need to exercise that political power on behalf of Canada and on behalf of everyone who uses technology in coalition with everyone else who's fighting these fights. You can do that through the political process, through the parties. And you can do it through pressure groups like the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, CCLA, open media, openmedia.ca, and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the nonprofit I've worked for 25 years at EFF.org. You know, we've been doing this work in Canada and in the US and around the world longer than anyone, and we're more effective than anyone. And we could use your support too. And it is through these organizations that you can get involved as a community and change the world the way farmers have changed the world so many times in the past.
Thank you for sharing your perspective with us today. It's frankly pretty mind-blowing stuff.
I appreciate it.
You're a very well-read man, and I can only imagine that your writings have predicted some of the dystopia that you're passionate about. And maybe that's the key, is that you have the foresight on that, given your other vocation, if you will. But I appreciate you. Thanks, Cory, for coming on. It's a very interesting argument, and hope that farmers, you know, examine this and give it some more thought. And I don't think it's something that's on our radar every day, but it is deserves a super strong consideration, especially, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, I mean, we won't get into it today, but just how much this is going to be amplified by artificial intelligence. This whole argument just went 100x, right?
Yeah, although, look, they're selling $100 bills for $1 a piece. They tried charging $5 for those $100 bills, and all their biggest customers said that's too expensive. Your $100 bills aren't worth $5 a piece. Now it's in the range of $2.3 trillion. They make $50 billion a year. anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. I think the biggest risk with AI is not that it's going to take your job, it's that those companies are going to implode, and the 35% of the stock market that is represented by 7 AI companies is going to be vaporized overnight, and then we're going to have an economic catastrophe. I think that's a much bigger risk than the idea that if we teach the word guessing computer too many words, it's going to wake up, become God, and enslave us or something. That's the real risk is the risk of every stock bubble, that ordinary people are going to get screwed and billionaires are going to make out like bandits.
Well, that is an interesting conversation. I'd like to have that in the future because I'm heavily involved with it, as we all are going to be.
Yeah.
Jim Hale is saying the allure of Deere tech integration is huge. They are definitely the leader in that tech space, and I've heard it said often too, they're really the leader in that data space just by virtue of their market share and how much data they've been collecting. But Jim says he's been able to withhold so far, but ironically as he types on an iPhone. So
yeah. Well, look, when there's a dominant player, it makes them quite vulnerable in the same way that when you have a monocrop, it's vulnerable to the same parasite. So, before the phone company was broken up, AT&T, they had the right under American law to control all the things that could be connected to a Bell phone. So only they could sell you a phone, and only they could connect things to those phones. They had the right to control everything connected to their network. And there was a company that made a device called the Hushaphone. And the Hushaphone was a black plastic cup that went over the headset of your phone, the mouthpiece of your phone, the phone you used to have in your kitchen stuck to the wall there, went over it and covered your mouth to muffle you while you spoke so people couldn't eavesdrop. And the Bell system, they argued that the Hushaphone, by attaching unauthorized equipment to the Bell network, was a danger to the security of America, because the Bell network was part of the fabric of American society. And they went to court to sue to block the Hushaphone, and they lost. And that opened the door to all the subsequent reforms that ended with us getting answering machines and then modems and all kinds of other stuff, and the Snoopy phone you could buy, at the Radio Shack. All of that stuff came out of Hushaphone. But here's the interesting thing: why was Hushaphone able to go into business? Because every phone in America was sold by Bell, and they all had the same shaped receiver, which means that if you made one accessory, it worked with every goddamn phone in the country. And when you have John Deere totally controlling the market, if you make an accessory that plugs into a John Deere tractor, every farmer can buy that accessory and use it, which means that you have a business that you can build out. And if those farmers like you better than John Deere, because you're the ones who are providing the independent technical assistance and so on, then maybe you sell them their next tractor too, right? That is a classic market entry strategy, what economists would call selling a complementary good. And it's a great way for new market entrants to get a toehold in markets. And it is the Achilles heel of every monopolist. The only thing that's stopping that from happening isn't capitalism, it's IP law. It's Bill C-11 that makes it illegal to reverse engineer and modify a John Deere tractor so you can attach third-party parts to it.
Jim has given an example of the Agra GPS bridge, so there are examples out there. Very enlightening, very thought-provoking. I appreciate you coming on the show, Cory, and thanks to everybody that attended and participated. So we'll talk to you soon, Cory. I appreciate it. Where do people get a hold of you if they want to find your stuff, or where's the best place to see Cory Doctorow stuff?
I have this daily-ish newsletter called pluralistic.net, and there's links across the top with how to get my books and whatnot. And contact me by email. I've got a public email address, been online since the late 90s. I also, as I mentioned, have, for my sins this week, my second week running, #1 Canadian best-selling nonfiction book in the country called The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Life After AI. And if you want to hear more about my thoughts about AI, you can pick that up at your local Indigo or McNally Robinson if you're in Winnipeg. It's their best-selling book in the store, and any other bookstore, of course.
Good for you, man. Congratulations. That's pretty exciting.
Well, thank you.
All right, I put the link in the chat there for anybody that wants to follow up. It's craphound.com. Craphound.com.
Yeah, that's my bio. But you can go to pluralistic.net to read my newsletter.
Is enshittification in the dictionary now? Is that a word?
Yeah, it's been in the Macquarie Dictionary and Webster's for a while, but the Oxford English Dictionary put it in last week. So it's now in the
There you
OED.
go.
I had a great week last week. Enshittification was put in the dictionary, and a #1 bestseller in Canada, #3 in the U.S. and on the New York Times list. And I found out that I am now cancer free. So it was a great week.
Wow.
It was,
And now you're on Growing the Future
oh,
Productions Live. I mean, how does it get any better?
yeah.
Well, good for you. I hope you live a very long life and contribute lots more
Oh, me
thoughts.
too.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care,
Well,
brother.
thanks, man.
Appreciate
See
you.